Let's talk about low light options. Once upon a time, there was a rule of thumb regarding what's the slowest shutter speed you can use and still not worry about camera shake. The rule was 1 over your focal length is the smaller that you can use. Here's what it means. If you've got a 100 millimeter lens, like a mild telephoto, then the slowest shutter speed you can use is 1/100th of a second, 1 over your focal length. Otherwise, anything slower than that, then your hand shakiness is likely to show up in the picture. Now, as you zoom in, not only does your image get magnified, but your shakiness gets magnified as well. And to counteract that, it's important to shoot with a higher shutter speed, because with faster shutter speeds, things that move, they'll be frozen instead of looking blurry. So if you went with a 200 millimeter lens, what's the fastest shutter speed you'd be able to use then? 1/200th of a second, right. And so on. If you had a wide-angle lens, like maybe a 24 millimeter, then you would actually be able to get away with a 1/24th of a second, which is pretty slow. Could you set your shutter speed to 1/24th with that much precision? No. A 25th of a second? Pretty close. So that was it in the olden days. With a wide-angle lens, you could shoot handheld at almost 25th of a second, a quarter of a second, with impunity. It was great. Then image stabilization started to kick in. And image stabilization is a very clever technique which Canon pioneered. It was essentially, there are sensors in the camera that can sense when the camera shakes, and then there are ways to correct for that shake in real time. With Canon's cameras, they would actually be able to move lenses up and down and left and right, an equal and opposite reaction to whatever camera shake you had. And it was optimized for the kind of human camera shake that happens. Other camera manufacturers like Sony, Minolta, and Pentax, they decided, well, move the sensor up and down and left and right. And that way you can use any lens and get image stabilization. And that's the way that one works. Each of these techniques promises 3 stops improvement in hand-holdable speeds. What does 3 stops look like? Well, this is the old system. And with image stabilization, you get 3 stops improvement. So 1 stop from 100th of a second is a 50th of a second. Another stop is a 25th of a second. Another stop of that is, what, 12.5? So 1 over 12.5, about 1/12th of a second. That's slow. That's pretty tremendous. From a 100th to a 12th of a second and still being able to get a steady shot without needing a tripod, that's pretty good. If you had a 200 millimeter lens, 1/25th of a second, a 3-stop improvement. If you shoot in sports, well, of course, if you shoot in sports, your subject is moving. So you may be able to take a steady shot from hands at 25th of a second, but if your subject is moving, what are you going to get?
Blur.
A blur, yeah. Let's say you have a wide-angle lens and you're shooting architectural footage. Let's see. 1 stop from 24th is a 12th of a second. 2 stops is a 6th of a second. And 3 stops is 1/3 of a second. 1/3 of a second is slow. And in my day, being able to shoot at 1/3 of a second without a tripod is pretty miraculous. I still own tripods because image stabilization is great, but it's not a panacea. If you're doing time exposures at night and all that, you still need it. Anything longer than these are still going to be needed. But these can help you in borderline situations where you don't have a tripod and you still need to be able to get the shot even though the light is starting to fall. That's about what you can expect from this. They are not miracles, although from an engineering point of view, they certainly are. But it's best not to rely on them in bad situations. If you're shooting in a theater like this, which is really pretty dark, even image stabilization is not going to save you because 25th of a second won't let in enough light. But that's what these are for, and that's what the shake reduction technology can do for you. I relied on it in several situations where the light was very low, I didn't have a tripod, and I still wanted to get the shot. It was a borderline situation. Some of my favorites are here. Again, low light, starting to fall, but it made the difference between getting a sharp shot that I could sell and a blurry shot that was a snapshot only for me. And it's very useful. So we talked about shutter speeds, and the lower the light gets, the longer the shutter has to stay open in order to collect more light. Now, what if the light gets really, really, really low? Like, for example, if you're shooting nighttime shots. Sometimes you can shoot at 30 seconds, sometimes a minute, sometimes 5 minutes, sometimes 10 minutes. These are called long exposure or time exposure shots. The light is so low that even your exposure meter is not going to tell you the correct amount. It's not that sensitive. Time exposures have to be a trial and error kind of thing. Here's the basic steps on how to get time exposures using whatever camera you have. The first thing you need to know is, how do you get the camera to go 5-minute, 10-minute, 20-second exposures? If you were to put your camera on shutter priority mode, S, or TV if you're on a Canon, and you were to dial down the shutter speed as slow as it will go, watch the shutter speed in the corner, 3.2 seconds, 5 seconds, 8 seconds, 20, 30 seconds. I keep turning it. 30 seconds is as long as it's going to let me go. That's it. What if you want to go longer than that? Then you have to take it out of shutter priority mode and put it to manual. When you're in manual mode, the camera will let you choose one additional shutter speed, and that is bulb. What in the world does bulb mean? Well, in the old-fashioned days, when you wanted to attach something to your camera and you wanted to take the picture from remote control, it was done by an air compression system. There was a little hose hooked up to the camera, and there was a bulb that you would squeeze. And when you squeezed the bulb, it would force air in, it would force a little plunger to press down the shutter button for you. For some reason, that nomenclature hasn't changed over the past 100 years. It's now called bulb, and what bulb mode does is it lets you leave the shutter open for as long as you press the button down. For example, it's taking the picture now. It's taking the picture now. I could hold on to this for 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then I'll pick my finger up, and then it's going to do that for as long as the original shutter was for. Yeah, this has been a bane of complaint for a lot of people. Why does the camera do that? First, let me explain what's going on. It will keep the shutter open for as long as you keep your finger there. And then, if you have this feature turned on, it will do what's called long exposure noise reduction. Long exposure noise reduction can be either on or off. What long exposure noise reduction does is try to remove the kinds of characteristic noise that happen at long exposures, because you're collecting a lot of light, but the sensor is also going to be very noisy, just naturally. Some of it's random noise, some of it's sensor-based noise is unique to the sensor. Long exposure noise reduction is designed to take two pictures. One is the very one that you did. For as long as you held the shutter button down, it'll take that picture, and then it'll take an identical picture in the dark with the shutter closed for the same duration at the same temperature and voltage. And then you'll capture the characteristic noise at that temperature, at that duration. And then it'll do what's called dark frame subtraction. It'll merge the two images together and remove the common noise between them. And what you're left with is a much cleaner time exposure shot. It's great. It's a time-honored technique for astrophotographers. But when you're shooting fireworks, it will drive your stress up, because you take a 10-second shot, then you got to wait 10 seconds for the next shot before you can take the next shot. Meanwhile, the best fireworks in the world are going off right now. So if you're shooting fireworks, turn that feature off. And then if you find the noise on the images to be annoying, remove it later in Photoshop. So that's what the noise exposure, long exposure noise reduction is. I'm going to turn it off for the purpose of this. And that's how you get into bulb mode. Now, the other problem of doing time exposures is you got to take your finger and leave it there for 10 minutes sometimes if it's really, really dark. And even the best of mimes will have a little bit of camera shake. You know, your finger cannot remain that still for that long. And when your finger shakes, your whole camera is going to shake, even though it's on a very steady tripod. So for that, I recommend the cable release that I showed you yesterday. And it plugs into the side and has a switch over here, and that little switch can slide down and keep the shutter open. It's simulating you putting your finger there. That's how I got all these other time exposure shots that I showed you here. And these ranged in duration from about 1 minute to about 10 minutes. The darker it is, the longer I kept it open. And again, the nice thing about digital is you can guess about what the time duration is, and then you look at what you just took. If it's too dark, keep it open longer. Easy. Back in my day, it was film. I had to bracket 20 different ways, and then when I got the slides back, I picked out the one I liked, and then that was it. So once again, digital makes things a whole lot better. So here's a step-by-step guide on how to get the time exposures, assuming your camera is capable of going into bulb mode. Here's what you do. Step number 1, use a tripod. Step number 2, if you have image stabilization feature, like the kind we just talked about here, turn it off. Why is that? In control systems, there's a phenomenon called phantom noise. And that means that you got these sensors that are just always looking for camera shake. And if you got the camera on a rock-solid tripod, those sensors are still going to detect phantom noise. They're still going to think that there's camera shake when there isn't. When you know your camera is really on a rock-solid tripod, turn it off. You'll actually get sharper pictures. And you'll be reducing your battery consumption at the same time. So set your shutter speed to something long, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, or B, and then just guess. Take any kind of a random guess. Look at it. If it's not the right intensity, make it darker or make it lighter by adjusting your settings. I always preferred setting this f-stop to something in the middle. One of the things that a lot of professional photographers realize, I didn't talk about it earlier, that every lens has a sweet spot. Yes, if you open it up all the way, only the thing in front will be in focus and the background will be fuzzy. But if you really want the best performance out of your lens, somewhere in the middle of your lens, f8, f5.6, f11, somewhere around there will get you the sharpest landscape pictures for general purpose photography. And when you're doing nighttime exposures, when you got all the variables under your control, why not set it to the range where your lens is really at its best? So I'd recommend f8, f11 around there. Use a cable release to make sure that your finger isn't introducing unwanted motion, and then look at it and make adjustments later on. Digital is great. Sometimes not all tripods are rock solid. You want to see what I use whenever I travel? And don't laugh. I've been using a tripod like this for 30 years. It fits in my backpack, it doesn't weigh me down, and it extends. It's wonderful. It's portable. It does what I need for group shots and all that. It's not the most stable in the world. But if you have a camera like this with a reasonable lens on it, it's good enough. If you got a lens like this on it and it's a windy night, it's inadequate. But travel is compromise. I don't bring my heaviest lenses or my heaviest cameras when I travel either, because convenience counts for a lot. That's convenient. I take my lighter cameras. Everything works out all right. If I'm really serious, if I'm a head gig, I'll be using some of those industrial strength tripods over there when steadiness really, really matters. But you got to enjoy yourself when you travel too. So we got techniques for shooting fireworks too. And they're almost identical to the checklist I gave you a few minutes ago. Fireworks are tricky because if you leave it open too long, you just see noise and you see smoke. And if you leave it open too short, you may miss, because you never know where the fireworks are going to be. So you got to go extra wide. And it's as much luck as it is technical settings. And sometimes to make the picture even more compelling, if you have a subject front and center, that gives you yourself a subject, and then you got some context for where this is. And because it was a dark night, I was able to leave it open for 15 seconds and still underexpose my subject a little bit, and it worked out very nicely. How do you think this image was created?
Paint.
Paint. That's wrong, but it's a good guess.
Somebody with a light moving it around.
Yeah, I put the camera on a tripod, kept the shutter open for a long time in a dark room, and I took a laser pointer. Now, it's hard to see here because the lights are kind of washing out the image. But I was able to redecorate without actually painting. See what things actually look like. It's a nice trick. And you've seen kids do this with fireworks also. So nighttime time exposures, leave it open and you can paint with your light. So how many people here have heard of histograms before? And how many of you are kind of mystified by what they actually do? A lot of you. Okay. It's actually not a complicated thing once somebody explains to you what it is. And then once you learn what it is, two things happen. One, you know a little bit better how to deal with difficult light, and you know if things are blown out. And two, you can bully other people online because you use histograms and you know what they mean. It's actually not complex at all. The basic idea is your camera can capture more information than your screen can show you, especially in the back of the screen. The picture on the left is a picture of the LCD screen on the back of my camera. And the picture on the right is the very same image shown on my computer as it actually came out of the camera. The LCD doesn't have enough dynamic range, which means it can't show you all the information the camera captured. This gets even more intense when you're shooting outside and you're using an electronic viewfinder or the display on the back of your camera. You're looking at the picture and say, well, it's being washed out. I can't really see if I caught all the detail or not. This is where histograms come in. They can show you if you got all the information, or more important, if things are being blown out or they got too much black in it. It'll let you see it graphically. Here's a basic idea and an oversimplification, just to show you how the histograms work. Histograms will take the image you see and show it to you as a representation of brightnesses. Over here, we have an image with 3 colors, black, white, and gray. Over on the right, we have a histogram representation of the same image. There's a lot of black, and the more black there is, the higher the spike. There's a lot of white, and there's a lot of gray. The gray spike is higher because there's more gray in the picture than there is black or white. So all it's doing is rearranging the pixels and stacking the ones that are alike on top of each other and letting you know, here's the range of brightnesses that are in your picture arranged by darkest on the left and brightest on the right. Here's another example. Now this was taken with a very low resolution camera. 16 pixels, 4 by 4. And that's what it looks like. You got 4 gray, you got 4 white, and you got 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 black. If this was a picture, this is a histogram representation of that picture. It says you got 4 black, and so you got 4 white, you got 4 white stacked up here. You got 4 gray, it shows up gray in the middle with this 4. You got 8 black, it's on the left because it's the darkest, and there's 8 of them, so it's taller. If you have a color picture, it turns into a black and white, and then it'll show you graphically where all those brightnesses go. That's all it is. There's no such thing as a proper histogram, by the way. All of it comes down to, once again, pre-visualizing your image and knowing what you have in mind. Here's a picture I took of a man and his dog. And you notice what the histogram looks like. There's a lot of gray, a little bit of black right over here. You see a little tiny spike? That black is the black in the pants, the black on the nose, anything that's just so dark there's no detail. That's when you see black over on the left. You got a lot of white over here, pegged on the right. What's that? That's the background. It's pure white. And it's pegged over here, means there's no detail on the white. It's blowing out. It's okay in this condition, in this particular shot, because it's a white background. I want the background to be white. So nobody can ever look at a histogram and say it's wrong. There's no such thing as a proper looking histogram. It depends on the image you're trying to create. Here's another example. This was taken at 4 in the morning in Namibia, and it was a sunrise. The things I do to get a shot.
Get up early.
Get up early. So here, there's a predominance of black in the silhouettes, and then you can see it over here as a spike in the histogram. Doesn't mean it's wrong. I want my subject to be silhouetted, so that's what a histogram of that shot's going to look like. There's a little bit of things being blown out right here. What's that? Well, it's the part right over here in the middle of that orange where the sunrise is. That's the part that's being blown out. But it's very, very little, and overall the composition looks very good. There's no such thing as a correct-looking histogram. Now, sometimes histograms will tell you details that you want to know. You're out in the field, you're taking a picture of a bird. Is it overexposed? Is it blowing out? Hard to know if you're looking at the back of your display. Histogram can tell you. And I'll show you some real-time examples with the camera in just a minute. But here's an example where I was shooting a bird. I think it's a crane, but I honestly don't know. And if you're a purist, the purist would say, The back of the neck of that bird is overexposed. You've blown it out. You fool. And you can see evidence of it right over here. What do you do to fix it? Well, you underexpose, right? And when you underexpose, everything in the histogram shifts to the left because that's the correct representation of what's going on. And instead of overexposing the back of the neck, now everything is proper. Nothing is being blown out at all. And you've now saved your shot. Once you blow out your highlights, you can't recover them later on in Photoshop. And that's why a lot of the folks who are shooting average subjects that don't have really, really bright whites or anything, they want to make sure their whites are not blown out. If they're not blown out, then you can recover them in Photoshop and make things look a little bit better. I'll show you an example of that later today too. But the histogram can let you know, did you get it in the field? Can I recover it later on if it's a little bit blown out? Let me give you a quick live demonstration. Here's the other great thing about live view. In addition to being able to see whether it's too dark or too light, you can also see, where is it? Where is it? I had it. There it is. See in the lower right-hand corner? That's a real-time histogram. It's showing you if anything's going to be blown out or not. And as I move my camera around, you can see the histograms start to move as well. So it's a great guide. If you're worried about blowing things out, histograms are a really, really great way to know. Let me try putting this on manual exposure and take it off of bulb mode. I'm going to make this 30 seconds. Okay, now there's two things that are letting me know I'm blowing out my highlights. One is the live view. Look at that. But if I was outdoors on a bright day, I couldn't tell if that was blown out or just white. So that's where the histogram in the bottom right-hand corner comes in. You can see all the white starting to stack up, and it's so bad that everything else is dwarfed by comparison. Now, as I start to lower the exposure, reduce the amount of light coming in, making it darker, you're going to see that histogram start to move in real time. First, I'm going to change my shutter speed, letting in less light. 10 seconds, 8 seconds, 6 seconds, 4, starting to get darker, starting to get darker. Now watch what happens to the histogram as it gets darker. Things start to move to the left. The whites are no longer as white. The midtones are starting to get black. See what's going on? Now you can start to see the histogram showing you there's a lot of black in this shot. And some of it is so black that there's no detail in the shadows. So it's a useful thing to know if you're out in the field on a bright day and you can't really see your images and you want to know, am I losing information on the right, meaning I'm blowing out my highlights, or losing detail on the left, meaning there's so little information in the shadows that there's no detail there. There's another way you can use it. If you don't have live view and you don't have the live view histogram, there's something else you can do. You can take a picture like that, and then you can look at it many different ways. If I press my display button here, and every camera is different. If I press my display button here, I'll see more information about what was shot and what the settings were. And then I see this. This is the histogram mode. Over on the right, we see 4 different histograms, a red, a green, and the blue, because sometimes something only bleed in the in the red section, but out in the green and the blue. So it breaks it down by color. And then the very top one is as if you converted the image to black and white, and then it shows you just the range of grayscale, like the examples I showed you on my laptop. Now, if that's too complicated for you, the part that's flashing is all you really need to know. If it's flashing, that means you're blowing out your highlights. Or if it's too dark, you're blowing out the shadows. Let me take a picture with shadows that are just too dark. I'm going to make it darker. And you can see the histogram on the right. It's starting to bunch up on the left. That means we got a lot of dark stuff that's going to lose detail. There it is. And now this thing's going crazy. So 2 kinds of things are flashing. Things that are being blown out. And you can see the histogram on the right. A little tiny spike on the right-hand side. Those are white. A little bit of white that's being blown out. And then there's a lot of black being bunched up on the left-hand side, and you can see that part flashing too. So it's alternately blown out, too dark, too bright, too dark. Now this is one of those things where you really can't capture both the light and the dark correctly. What's my subject? Well, my subject really is the easel, so I ought to be exposing for that and not worrying about the exposure. So I'm going to hit my auto exposure lock button, meaning that's the exposure right there. Zoom out and recompose. My easel will be well composed, well exposed, and the rest of it will be black. But that's okay because the easel's my subject. No such thing as a correct histogram. It depends on what you want to do and what's important to you in the shot. That's all the histograms are. It's letting you know if you're losing information, and it's done in such a way that if you can't see all the detail in the back of your LCD display, you're still okay because you can see what's going on graphically. So histograms, again, this is for your own edification about 10 years from now as you're going through the handouts. Histograms are designed to let you know if you're losing important information in an environment where the sun is so bright you can't see it on the back of your LCD display. So that's why you'll see a lot of professionals shoot, and then they'll look at it and they'll check the histograms. Is anything being blown out? And they'll shoot again. By the way, this process is called chimping. You use your optical viewfinder, look. Optical viewfinder, look. And of course, while you're looking, that's when the interesting picture happens. That's the other reason I love the live view and the electronic viewfinder. Because in the electronic viewfinder, you can see in real time what's happening. And then when you take the picture, it'll play it back to you in this little tiny viewfinder too. You don't have to chimp. And because you have the live histogram, you know ahead of time if you're going to blow something out, and you don't have to check afterward. It's a great time saver, and you're not doing this all the time, which just makes you look like a fool, Frank. Let's face it. So histograms can save the world.